it's Mo. There are so many great small indie presses or just small presses out there, many of which I have not read very many books from, like Tilted Access Press is one that I'm super interested in. They do, I think, mostly translated work by Asian authors. They recently had a book on the International Booker for 2022, and I always see their cool covers with their interesting slash kind of logo on them. Another iconic looking small press, which I have also not read, is Fitzcarraldo with their iconic blue and white covers. Even slightly larger presses like Tor, who I have read from, do really interesting books. And I think the theme of these smaller presses is that they are focused on maybe a particular style of book, maybe a particular genre of book, but definitely doing something interesting and innovative that really big presses might steer away from. And of course, we all know that one of my favorites of these is NYRB. The New York Review of Books is a small press out of New York, and they kind of focus on forgotten classics or works by famous authors, but these particular works have gone unnoticed, and they're one of my favorite kind of books. They're well known for their very distinctive looking covers and spines, and that's just one of the reasons that I love this small press. Every year in April, we do NYRB April, which is a time to read NYRB books, celebrate NYRB books, and of course this April I'm participating in that as well. I highly recommend their books, and I'm going to go over all the books that I've read from New York Review of Books, all the books that I own, maybe a few that I'm not even planning on reading. Let's start with the books that don't look like their beautiful covers. I got this edition of Stoner by John Williams at a used book sale. Whoever read it before me had some sort of white paint or something on their hands. This is not their typical cover. It's a hardback with this geometric pattern, and then also it has a geometric pattern in the fly papers, but it is a similar shape to their normal books. I am excited to read this one. It is about a normal man's life from birth to death, and apparently he's a very mundane character, but it's a very introspective, thoughtful book, and I'm looking forward to reading it soon. Another weirdly shaped NYRB book is this NYRB poetry book. It is The Interior Landscape, Classical Tamil Love Poems by A.K. Ramanujan. This is what the NYRB Poets editions look like. So they are slightly different, but they definitely have the same vibe as these books. Bold colors and soft paperback editions. I have already read this book. It will be in my April wrap-up. It is a look at classical and ancient poems traditionally told in India. It's really interesting because it not only has quite a bit of the poetry in it, it also has an explanation of the form of poetry within it, as well as some of the ideas of the language of this book and why and how it was translated. Moving on to other NYRB books that I have read. Last year I read An American Greenland by Tete Michael Kombasi. This is a nonfiction about Kombasi's journey from Togo to Greenland and his perseverance in a dream that he had of visiting Greenland and living in Greenland. This one was a really great nonfiction. Last year during NYRB April, I also read To Each His Own by Leonard Skazkazia, and this one made it to my top 10 books of 2022. It is a Sicilian crime novel. I also read Season of Migration to the North by Taib Salih. This was another sort of crime novel slash mystery set in the Sudan. Last year I read The True Deceiver by Tove Jansson. Again, this has some mysterious elements. It is about a young woman caring for her brother who struggles to live a normal life in the society in which they live, and kind of how our main character scams people to be able to live their lives. The first NYRB book that I read was a few years ago, A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. This follows a young painter and restorer of paintings as he returns from World War I and is kind of at a loss for what to do. So he ends up going to a small town, spending a month in the country, restoring a painting in a church. Another NYRB book that I've read this year is Peking Story, Last Days of Old China. Again, this one will be in my April wrap-up. This nonfiction follows David Kidd's life in China. He was an English teacher there and met his wife, and it explores his feelings and his familial relationship as China and Peking changes over to a communist nation. Some other NYRB books that I got this year is Max Havelaar, or Coffee Auctions of the Dutch Trading Company by Multatuli. This one is a kind of satirical look at Dutch colonial administration's struggle to end exploitation of Indonesian peasantry, and it is like based on historic events, but it is supposed to be like a very searing, biting, satirical look at that time from within the Dutch culture. I also got The Fountain Overflows by Rebecca West. I think this is a family story about sisters and kind of how they go from being protected and waited on to being more independent women. And recently on my trip to Brooklyn, I picked up The Door by Magda Szabo. This is about two female friends, possibly more, and it is supposedly a very intriguing and dark look at this friendship. Like all my books that I read, I've found most of these at used bookstores, at library sales, or in little free libraries. The next books that we're going to talk about are ones that I've gotten over the years using those means and I haven't yet read. First, we have Sleepless Nights by Elizabeth Hardwick. This is, I think, kind of a fever dream of a woman's sleepless thoughts. I picked this up at a used bookstore in Belmar, New Jersey. A NYRB book that's intriguing to me is The Tenants of Moonbloom by Edward Lewis Wallant. This one I picked up from a little free library in Asbury Park, New Jersey, and it follows a main character who is the caretaker of an apartment building, Moonbloom, and how he interacts with all the tenants. Next, we have Autobiography of a Corpse by Sigmund Chovanskovy. I think this is sort of a philosophical, big brain look at different stories and fables, but done in a comic way. Another book that I found at a little free library is Lucky Jim by Kingsley Amos. This is a possibly dark academia, but I think just sort of academia look at a young man's time at Oxford. The next four books are ones that I have picked up at library sales or used bookstores that maybe I'm not going to get to anytime soon, partly because of how large they are, partly because of subject matter, and partly just because now I have quite a few NYRB books to get to. These still have a special place on my bookshelf, but they're not the most exciting NYRB books for me. The first is Madame de Pompadour by Nancy Mitford. This is a fictional tale of a real person who was the mistress of Louis XV. The one that I got this year is Berlin Alexanderplatz by Alfred Doblin. This is the story of a man living in Berlin and kind of his whole life story, starting out when he is released from prison and flashing back to his younger days and moving forward in time. Next, we have The Year of the French by Thomas Flanagan. This one I actually had on my want to read list, and I've seen other copies of this. I think it is a historical fiction, again, talking about real events in Ireland in the 1700s. And finally, we have Fortunes of War, the Levant trilogy by Olivia Manning. I think there are 3 sets of 3 books each. Unfortunately, this one happens to be the middle set, which is the reason that I won't get to this one right away, because I would need the other sets first to complete the trilogies. This seems to follow 2 of the people from the first trilogy as they continue on through their lives. One of the great things about NYRB is that they do a lot of translated work as well as forgotten classics, and that's one of the only flaws that I see with the NYRB books is that they don't list the translator on the cover. They are well known for having interesting introductions, forewords, or afterwards by other authors or historians, but but they really should list the translator on the cover as well. The translator of An African in Greenland is James Kirkup. The translator of To Each His Own is Adrian Falk. The translator of Season of Migration to the North is Dennis Johnson Davies. The translator of The True Deceiver is Thomas Teal. The translator of Berlin Alexanderplatz is Michael Hoffman. The translator of Autobiography of a Corpse is Adam Turwill. The translator of The Door is Len Ricks. The translator of Max Haverill is Ina Rilke and David McKay. Let me know if you love NYRB books. They're so fun to read. They're floppy and comfortable, and they always have really nice, soft but not squishy covers. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I showed you here. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!